There's nothing to be gained by his continued incarceration, and we want him brought home to Australia.
Civilian casualties never before reported anywhere. That's a very serious role.
An agreement that's about peace and security in our region, but also about prosperity.
Converting illegitimate authority. The question is whether the authority is legitimate or whether it is illegitimate.
After Julian Assange was finally freed by a court in Saipan, a U.S. Pacific territory, on June 26th, ending a 14-year legal saga, his lawyer gave credit where it was due. Jennifer Robinson, Assange's Australian attorney, praised Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese for his crucial role in securing Assange's release. She highlighted how diplomatic efforts and relentless lobbying with top U.S. officials were pivotal in Assange finally walking free. This marked the end of a journey that included 5 years in a high-security British prison and 7 years seeking refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. At every opportunity, and when Australian officials were making outreach to the U.S., they knew that they were acting with the full authority of the Prime Minister of Australia, Robinson said outside the courtroom in Saipan. However, on Wednesday, White House National Security spokesman John Kirby clarified that the White House had no involvement whatsoever in Assange's case, despite his recent release earlier in the week. Australians take a stand. Prime Minister Albanese of Australia sees Assange's release as a victory for the country. Australia used its close security relationships with Washington and London to push for a resolution to the situation involving one of its citizens. This work has been complex, and it has been considered. This is what standing up for Australians around the world looks like, Albanese, leader of the centre-left Labour government, told Parliament on Wednesday. Assange, who arrived back in Australia on Wednesday evening, was staring down a potential 175-year prison sentence for charges including multiple breaches of the U.S. Espionage Act and a hacking offense. However, a breakthrough came on Tuesday when he agreed to plead guilty to 1 count of espionage and was released. The deal gathered steam as the U.S. encountered mounting legal hurdles in the U.K. regarding Assange's extradition, while Australian lawmakers and diplomats intensified pressure in Washington and London. A political will change. A decade ago, when a conservative government held sway in Canberra, there was little support for Julian Assange's cause, according to his father, John Shipton. However, things took a turn in 2023 when lawmakers from across the political spectrum rallied behind the campaign to bring Assange home. This shift culminated in February this year with a parliamentary motion demanding Assange's release. Shipton praised the Australian government as magnificent and specifically mentioned former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd and former Defence Minister Stephen Smith for their efforts as top envoys to the U.S. and Britain. Australian Conservative lawmaker Barnaby Joyce, a former Deputy Prime Minister, joined a bipartisan group of politicians who traveled to Washington in September to advocate for a resolution. Reflecting on the trip, Joyce emphasized to media that Australian politicians wanted to swiftly resolve the issue, seeing it as a distraction to the country's security alliance with the United States. Greg Barnes, a longtime advisor to the Australian campaign for Assange, noted that U.S. politicians recognized during this trip that the issue wasn't about party politics. According to an anonymous government official, the turning point for Assange came in January 2021, when then-Shadow Attorney General Mark Dreyfus called for an end to the case, following a British court's ruling against extraditing Assange to the U.S., deeming it unjust. This was the first indication that a major political party in Australia was supporting the cause to free Assange, the official said. When Labour took office in May 2022, Julian Assange finally gained diplomatic backing from the Australian government. Later that year, Prime Minister Albanese publicly called for Assange's release during a session in the House of Representatives. It was the first time a Prime Minister had addressed Assange in Parliament since 2012. "Enough is enough. It is time for this matter to be brought to a conclusion," he said. "My position is clear and has been made clear to the U.S. administration that it is time that this matter be brought to a close. This is an Australian citizen. Behind closed doors, Prime Minister Albanese and key cabinet members like Foreign Minister Penny Wong and Attorney General Dreyfus made strategic visits to the U.S. to lobby their American counterparts, as revealed by a government official. The appointment of Stephen Smith and Kevin Rudd to top diplomatic posts in London and Washington in late 2022 added influential voices supporting Assange's cause. Smith notably visited Assange in Belmarsh prison in April 2023, marking the first visit by Australia's top UK diplomat since Assange's imprisonment began 4 years earlier.
You think of his activities, Mr. Assange's case had dragged on for far too long.
Well, they haven't made their allegations. That's incorrect.
Or made claims?
Yeah.
Positions were put in some danger because of their public disclosure. It also chilled the ability of American personnel.
Getting Biden's attention. As recently as last July, U.S. officials seemed determined to prosecute Assange. Secretary of State Antony Blinken emphasized U.S. concerns over the issue. However, just a month later, U.S. Ambassador to Australia Caroline Kennedy hinted that a deal could be on the table. After a bipartisan group of Australian politicians traveled to Washington in September to discuss Assange's case with lawmakers from both parties, the Biden administration appeared to soften its stance. President Joe Biden indicated in April that they were considering Australia's request to drop Assange's prosecution. The breakthrough came in May, when the UK High Court allowed Assange to appeal against his extradition, a move hailed by his wife Stella as triggering negotiations for a plea deal. This decision meant the extradition battle could face further delays due to pending appeals. Originally planning for Assange to enter his plea in New York or Washington, the location was changed to Saipan because Assange opposed being in the continental United States. This deal marks the end of a lengthy legal saga following WikiLeaks' release of secret U.S. documents in 2010, one of the largest security breaches in U.S. military history. As Assange was quietly moved from Belmarsh prison to London's Stansted Airport late on Monday night, secrecy was paramount. According to his wife Stella, even their children were kept in the dark to prevent any inadvertent leaks about his release. Following the news, there was a global surge of support, with a crowdfunding campaign launched to cover the $520,000 owed to the Australian government for the flights. By Wednesday evening, the campaign had already raised nearly $418,000. A creative breakthrough. U.S. Ambassador Kevin Rudd has claimed credit for influencing Julian Assange to agree to a plea deal with the U.S. Justice Department, amid a political dispute over the WikiLeaks founder's return to Australia. The opposition criticized Prime Minister Anthony Albanese for warmly welcoming Assange, who had pleaded guilty to a conspiracy charge shortly after his arrival in Canberra on Wednesday night. In his first public remarks since Assange left London's Belmarsh prison, Rudd suggested that Australia's diplomatic efforts had required creative thinking to secure Assange's release. Asked if he persuaded Assange to accept a plea deal to bring the matter to a close, Rudd said, "You could say that. I couldn't possibly comment. Ultimately, it was a matter for the parties." Assange's legal team has acknowledged Albanese and Rudd for their crucial roles in securing his release. Rudd stated that since becoming ambassador in early 2023, he served as the main liaison between the U.S. Justice Department and Assange's lawyers. He emphasized that Albanese's clear mandate allowed him to effectively pursue the matter with the Biden administration. Asked if he acted as a linchpin in the negotiations, he replied, "That's your term, not mine." Rudd said he feared the Assange case would have become a long-term irritant in the U.S.-Australia relationship if it continued to drag out through the courts. The opposition at play. The Albanese government swiftly moved past the release of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, despite criticism from the opposition that it had celebrated a convicted criminal's return. Anthony Albanese's public support for Assange has sparked concern among national security experts, given Assange's history of releasing vast amounts of classified U.S. military and government information. During question time on Thursday, there was speculation of a potential walkout by coalition MPs if Assange attended Parliament. However, Assange did not show up, despite a note suggesting he might be present. Instead, his wife Stella, lawyer Jennifer Robinson, and other supporters sat in the public gallery's distinguished seats, though they did not receive the usual acknowledgement from the Speaker for notable guests. Interestingly, Albanese faced no questions from Labour or crossbench MPs regarding the Assange issue. Former Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack remarked that Assange's presence would have been controversial, and he would have protested in some way, although the situation ultimately didn't arise. Opposition Foreign Affairs spokesman Simon Birmingham said it was wrong that Mr. Albanese had spoken to Mr. Assange and greeted him like a homecoming hero, and suggested the advocacy on behalf of a polarizing figure had damaged relations with the U.S. The Australian-American alliance is an enormously strong one, and it can withstand many, many things, he said, but there will be many Americans who think that it's inappropriate for the Australian Prime Minister to provide that type of homecoming welcome to Julian Assange, having just pleaded guilty to U.S. charges. Senator Birmingham said it was wrong Mr. Albanese had put Mr. Assange on the same level as people who genuinely have been political prisoners and genuinely were wrongly detained, people like Cheng Lai, Kylie Moore-Gilbert, Sean Turnell. According to a source in national security, Mr. Albanese's handling of the Assange case has stirred unease among some parts of the intelligence community. Contrary to Senator Birmingham's statement, U.S. Ambassador to Australia Caroline Kennedy expressed gratitude to the Australian government for their commitment and support throughout the entire process.